Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We will wait just another minute before we get started.
Okay, and come to next week. I'll turn the camera on.
All right. Well, welcome, everyone, to today's webinar called Designing and Facilitating Effective Online and Blended Teacher Professional Development, a discussion. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Cambridge Educational Dialogue Research Group, also known as CEDiR, based at the Faculty of Education, University of Cambridge, and by the Digital Education Futures Initiative, also known as DEFI, at Hughes Hall at the University of Cambridge. I am Dr. Kevin Martin, the Managing Director of DEFI, and I will be your host for today's webinar. In today's webinar, we will explore evidence-based principles for designing and facilitating online courses that motivate and retain participants. I am joined by today's speakers, which include Meaghan Brugha, an experienced designer of online teacher professional development programs, by Dr. Farah Ahmed, who most recently founded the Islamic Educator learning community online platform and has deep experience of course development, and by Professor Sara Hennessy, presenting on behalf of Dr. Kristeen Chachage, who will talk about their experience with online teacher professional development in Tanzania. Unfortunately, Kristeen has been unable to join us today due to a power cut in Tanzania, but if we get lucky, she may be joining late. But thank you, Sara, for stepping in on her behalf. All of the speakers today, including myself, have varying intersections of research interests and experience, but perhaps most notably with our mutual focus on the central role of dialogue in teaching and learning, and a belief that technology can both enhance that dialogue and open more educational opportunities. So I'm sure you will hear more about that today as our speakers present. Today's webinar is being recorded. We will cover a lot of content today, and we hope and expect that this recording will be used as a resource in and of itself. However, an hour and 15 minutes is a limited amount of time, and if something discussed here today piques your interest and you would like to learn more, the recording of this webinar will be made available on both the DEFI and CEDiR websites. Our format today will run as follows. Each of our speakers will present on their work for approximately 5 minutes, at which point, after all speakers have presented, I will open a group discussion between our panelists. During the group discussion, I will ask questions submitted in advance of the webinar and pull audience questions as they are submitted to the chat. And I encourage all of you to use the inbuilt chat feature here in Zoom to ask those questions of our panelists. So I believe that has covered everything. Just a reminder to keep your microphones on mute unless you are one of our presenters. And Meaghan, I invite you to get started.
Thanks so much, Kevin. So just to start, I'm going to put a couple links here in the chat. The first one is just a link to the actual course that I'll be referencing. And the second link is just to a publication. And the reason why I'm doing this, these are also on the last slide, which I will now share. And the reason why I'm doing this is just because we probably won't have time to really go into the detail of these things. And so if you want to sort of look through in more detail, those two links will give you that. So let me just share some slides here. Can I check everyone see that?
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, just to say again, thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. So as Kevin kindly introduced me, my name is Meaghan Brugha. I'm dialing in from a very snowy Ottawa, Canada, and I'm going to be discussing findings related to the design and the trial of an online course series for teachers that were part of my PhD research. My PhD is part-time, and for further context, I've been specializing in EdTech research and program evaluation for over a decade now, and I do that alongside my academic research. So this subject area is one that I'm quite particularly passionate about. We really want this session to be a dialogue between course designers here on the panel. It's an opportunity to discuss our findings, our design principles, but it's also a chance to reflect on areas of continued challenge and opportunity. And just to say, while we're not able to be in person and create small group discussions with everyone, we would really invite your comments, your questions, any feedback you have, reflections and insights. So please don't be shy. So to give you a little bit more context about, the courses that we'll be referencing in this seminar, my PhD research sought to explore the intersection of technology and dialogic pedagogy to enhance teacher inquiry and professional development. I asked how technology might afford new forms of dialogue to support the development of a teacher community of practice in which practitioners can reflect together, they can support one another, and they can share their practice in a really meaningful way. So to explore these questions, I used something called Course in a Box on GitHub to build a course for practitioners who were interested in developing their understanding and practice in educational dialogue. Initially, there was just going to be one course, and then it became 3 courses. If anyone is interested, by the way, in using Course in a Box, I highly recommend it. It's open access, and you can essentially create an online course for free. And there's a really huge community base where everyone supports one another, which is really nice. So the first course in the series, The Fundamentals of Educational Dialogue, that was developed and facilitated by both myself and Farah Ahmed, who's also a speaker today. And Farah will be talking about the Halakha MOOCs that you can see on the right part of that table, and I'll be talking through the core MOOCs on the left. So this first course was designed as an introduction to educational dialogue and some of the foundational theories behind it. The second course is to support educators as they conduct a reflective inquiry into their practice to explore their use of educational dialogue. And this was originally part of the third course, and now it's being completed on Camtree's platform instead of GitHub. Camtree is the Cambridge Teacher Research Exchange platform, and we'll likely bring it up again during the discussion because of its role in the future of these courses. But I've also included a link to that in the last slide as well. The third course is for facilitators. Facilitators are individuals who want to support their colleagues in developing their dialogic practices. So the expectation here with this series is that participants who don't have any prior experience with educational dialogue can complete the first course, and then we'll be in a strong position to do the second course and then potentially become local facilitators themselves to support their colleagues. So it really does work as a series. The conceptual framework of the course is really important to note here because we drew heavily on research that highlights the need for teacher agency and flexibility for teachers to be able to apply their learning to varied contexts and settings. The wider framing of the research is supporting teachers to enact high quality educational dialogue in their classrooms to improve learning outcomes and other skills, 21st century skills. And lastly, the other notable feature is that the course was designed using a mechanical MOOC model. Now, mechanical MOOCs, for those who aren't familiar, are this really interesting alternative to the more common MOOC platforms that you might be familiar with, like edX and Coursera or FutureLearn. And the approach argues for a difference in how we conceptualize an online learning platform, so that instead of it being sort of institutionally driven or expert driven, it's community driven. It's a hub, a learning hub, where learners are encouraged to collaborate. They're encouraged to draw on their own and one another's experiences and knowledge to acquire further knowledge. And this really resonated with me because it aligns with the framework of the community members, the educators being expert in their own contexts. So I'll show you a couple of screenshots here. This is just a screenshot of the fundamentals of educational dialogue. And now you have the link if you want to actually go into the course, and then you can sort of rummage around. It's open access. Anybody can go in. You don't have to sign up to get into the material of the course. There were 6 weeks of course materials, and I tried to keep the platform really streamlined. This was partly because of my own technical skills in building a course like this, but also I wanted to keep the navigation very simple. Each of the weeks has the same section. I've just included a few of them on this slide here. So they're same section. So there was always a watch for a sort of tutorial of the thematic sort of focus for the week. Then there was a read section with, readings, publications and resources, a do section with activities for participants to fulfill, and then the discuss section, which included some questions for them to respond to in the discussion forum, which was hosted on another website. So let's see here. I'm just going to quickly talk through a couple of these things, and I recognize I'm running out of time. So we used a design-based approach and mixed methods for our data collection and analysis. And part of what we looked at was the MOOC site user analytics, so click logs, heat maps, that kind of thing, to get an idea of how people sort of moved throughout the course. We had a pre and post-course questionnaire. We looked at discussion forum data, which was really interesting, and interviewed course participants and key experts in the field, or sort of key informants in the field. And then within this, we tested design principles and offered amendments and adaptations to some of them based off of the findings from the newer iterations of the course. We collected data from all of the participants, but just to give you an idea of who they were, this table was from course 3, trial 2, so the second facilitators course. You can see most participants were female, between the ages of 26 and 35. They taught different age groups, but as you can see, many were educators at the higher ed level. I didn't list it here, but there were quite a few mathematics and science teachers. Participants were based in many different countries globally. And I'd also asked whether or not they'd taken a MOOC before, and many had. And those who had previously taken MOOCs in this particular trial were much more likely to complete the course requirements to receive a certificate than those who hadn't. So the last slide here before I pass it back to Kevin is just a sort of overview of the design principles and our findings. I'm not going to go through these all because that's what we're going to be discussing later in terms of, what really worked, what were those ingredients for success, as well as what were the challenges. But just to say that each one of these sort of tackles both of those things. As an example, in design principle 10, this is something I've just been sort of thinking about a lot. That is, because of the mechanical MOOC model, anyone, as you can see, if you clicked on the course, can access any of the materials at any time. So it's not like there would be on a locked site where you could really track user engagement differently. I was still able to look at the click logs and isolate unique user IDs, but that only gave me a very surface level understanding of the engagement. So there are things that worked in that principle and things that that require further research and troubleshooting. The last slide here has those links I mentioned, and so I believe that this will be made available to you afterwards as well. So just included links to the different courses, the website that the discussion forum was hosted on, and so on. So I think that I'll leave it there for the context, but like I said, we'll be discussing the findings in more detail in our sort of panel discussion to come. So I'll pass it back over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Megan. And as a reminder, if you have questions for Megan or any of our panelists today, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And now I invite Farah to present. And Farah, you are still on mute.
Apologies for that.
Yep,
Okay.
we can hear you now. Good.
Brilliant. Hello, everybody. So I just want to say first thanks to Meaghan, because she's covered a lot of basics of how the courses that she's described. The work that I'm going to talk about it kind of dovetails in. We've worked together, and there's a lot of similarities. So I'm going to talk about a project called the Islamic Educator Learning Community, which is a project that is basically part of my postdoc study that I've been doing. And just so that you'll give you a little bit of an idea about what this is, it's a learning community of Islamic educators. What that means is anyone working with or teaching Muslim learners aged from 3 to 18 years, which includes homeschoolers. It's an online, well, it aspires to be an online research exchange platform hosted by Camtree, and is designed to facilitate exchange between Islamic scholarship, educational research, and Islamic schools and educators. So we're trying to use this platform as a way of developing and exploring ideas within faith-based schooling, essentially. The platform supports teachers and educators to engage in reflective practice, conduct their own classroom research inquiries to improve learning, and then they can then share their inquiries via the Camtree library, which I won't explain, but if you want to look it up, I'm sure somebody will put a link in the chat. So the vision is that as schools and educators are going to be collaboratively growing a knowledge base of pedagogical innovations drawn from Islamic educational theory. So it's not just applying what we see in mainstream educational research to our practices, but looking at Islamic, very rich intellectual heritage, very rich educational practices, and what we might do with them today, and to use these to inform policy and practice to improve learning for all, especially most vulnerable and disadvantaged. So it's a growing community sharing their learning. So the questions I had in terms of research is, in what ways can traditional Islamic dialogic practices in particular be integrated with educational dialogue research and edtech research to enhance practice across international contexts? What capacity is there for practitioner professional development through asynchronous dialogue across the global North and South? What are the affordances and limitations of mechanical MOOCs in accessing hard-to-reach practitioner communities in low-income contexts? And what's the role of dialogue in youth development in a range of Muslim contexts? So I want to talk a little bit about the participants, because this platform isn't just for your full-time schooling. It also is there for a lot of supplementary schooling that's going on, weekend schooling, after school classes, even youth clubs, and so on. So when we're talking about teachers, they're often not qualified teachers working as a career-based teacher in the kind of full-time schools. And so in my research, which essentially involved teachers taking an online course, I'm reporting on one, I've done two, but I'm reporting on the first one, and then looking at who takes the course, what they do with it, and what happens as a result. So the participants of the course so this first course is about Islamic ideas about educational dialogue and what you might do with them in your classroom. That's what the course is about. We had a pre-course survey, which 173 people took. 56 people took a post-course survey, and 59 completed a report, and only 40 completed both. So you can see that the numbers are a little bit confused because it was all optional. We couldn't force them to take the survey or complete the report. The report is actually a reflective inquiry report into their own practice. And they had to complete it to a sufficient level to get a certificate to say that they completed the course, which actually motivated them to do that. But only 50 actually received the certificate, because 9 of the reports were just copying and pasting from the course. So we didn't consider it to be that they had engaged with it. We couldn't see what they had done with it in their own classroom. Participants came from across 24 different countries, and as I said, all different types of settings. So it could be from early years all the way to higher education, but a lot of like these supplementary schools, Quran schools, and so on. And in terms of their level of professional qualification, apologies, let me go back. You can see here that we had, large majority would either have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, which was interesting. And then we did have a few with a postgraduate diploma or certificate, and less people accessed it and a few with a doctorate with qualifications below that, and these are professional qualifications, so to do with education. But you did have people with I think it's 13% with just training on the job, that's how they put it, and 12% with no teaching qualification whatsoever, 9% with a diploma, and 4% with a certificate. So very varied distribution. I have also included a chart there with gender distribution, and it's often the case in please bear with me. Often the case in education, the vast majority were female. This is a little bit of a data that came in terms of their familiarity with the MOOCs and in comparison with age ranges. And quite a few had taken a MOOC before, but then majority hadn't. And some had taken a MOOC but not related to their profession, some across to do their profession, and then some were familiar with MOOCs even though they hadn't taken them. There quite a few people actually didn't know what a MOOC was. And I one of the things that I'm thinking about is to actually drop that term, because people get confused and don't understand that it's just an online course. There is an age disparity there as well if you're interested. Okay, so the primary findings, the participants appreciated the course content, and that was one of the key things. Actually, the content of the course was quite meaningful to them. It helped them think about traditional forms of learning and how these could be more dialogic. It gave them a deeper understanding of human personhood and character education, because a lot of them are engaged in faith formation and identity formation. 55% said that the course impacted their practice a lot, 30% said a moderate amount, and 11% a limited amount. So 96% found it impacted practice, and very small people found that it didn't. These are people responding to the survey, some of whom may not have completed the course, so we need to bear that in mind. Participants found the live sessions important to help understanding and to sustain commitment. And that's significant, because when the initial course designed was to try and keep this as entirely asynchronous, self-paced, that doesn't seem to have worked with many people. People want to be able to have a weekly drop in, some sort of contact with a course facilitator. The biggest barrier to course completion was other personal professional responsibilities, which is to be expected. 39% found the readings overly challenging, which is whereas some of them people were saying that they really, really appreciated the reading. So this was the whole idea of how do you pitch a course like this with people from vastly different kind of educational backgrounds and indeed geographical backgrounds. 7% found the activities overly challenging, so less people struggled with those. 11% reported low internet bandwidth as a barrier, which we were interested in, but only 2% reported a lack of device. A lot of people were able to access it on their mobile phones, which was really helpful. There are some emerging themes. I won't go into the detail because I'm actually very interested in what they do with the content. But in terms of course design, some of the things that are emerging is that adapting dialogic teaching practices are very diverse learning environments, and they were very conscious of that. Course participants talked about how that worked and what happened there. They were very interested in harmonizing Western educational influences with Islamic principles. There was a commitment from educators to infuse these Islamic values and dialogic approaches, which was really heartening, because that was the aim of what the course is trying to do. Dialogic engagement within Halakha. Halakha is a very traditional form of circle of learning, and the course is built around what they can do to adapt that and make it more dialogic. And one of the things that came out was that they found it very challenging to define what Halakha is, because it's used in so many different ways. And I didn't want to say to them, this is what you do and this is exactly how you would do it. And they did find quite a few challenges in making their Halakha, as I said, the circle of learning, dialogic. There was resistance to change in educational contexts. So they found that colleagues didn't quite understand, school leaders weren't sure about what they were trying to do. They wanted to really explore this idea of defining Halakha as a circle of learning and dialogue and what that meant. But there was a huge emphasis from the participants on interaction, reflection, and discussion in Halakha, which I think was significant, because obviously what I'm trying to do is promote more dialogic practices. And that is it. I've just I'll stop there. And that gives you a flavor of the courses and the design of those courses and the findings from my research.
Thank you, Farah. Again, audience members, I encourage you to ask questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And Sarah, the webinar is yours.
Thanks very much, Kevin. And first, just to apologize to everybody, I'm stepping in for Kristeen, who, for those of you who weren't here right at the beginning, is in Tanzania, and a power cut has prevented her from joining anything online. I'm stepping in at very short notice, and I've only just seen her slides and her notes a short time before this webinar. So please bear with me. It is work that I'm involved in, but I've not prepared in the way that I normally would do. So please forgive any hiccups, hesitancies, whatever else. So let me see if I can share. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Yeah. So a little bit of background about what I'll be presenting about. The government of Tanzania launched a national TPD initiative called MOOCs in Swahili, which basically translates as Teacher Continuous Professional Development in English. And it's centered on school-based communities of learning as the main modality. The key feature is a learning management system, an LMS, which has online modules for blended teacher learning. Okay, so we're part of a team at EdTech Hub, partnering with the government in the form of the Tanzania Institute of Education and also Aga Khan University in Dar es Salaam to conduct research to kind of evaluate this, to look at the impact of the ongoing implementation and how it can be improved. So it's a multi-phase project. We're just finishing the first phase, which was design-based implementation research, which was looking at the how well the school-based community of learning model worked in 8 remote rural schools to see, amongst other things, how the teachers use technology, how they access the resources to support communities of learning, what kind of challenges they had, and so on. So we're working with the Tanzania Institute of Education also to provide them with some what we call technical assistance, so helping them actually develop the learning management system. It's not what I personally have been involved with, but some of the team have done that. So some of the reflections that we'll be sharing today sort of come from both aspects of that project, but the sort of the research, the field work, but also the process of developing and preparing the COL, Community of Learning COL modules. So the online modules are accessed by teachers through a Moodle-based platform, the LMS. So they look a little bit like a MOOC or other online courses with a similar interface. It has the LMS that they've developed has multiple modules organized by school or grade level and focus area. So some of them are general pedagogy and some of them are subject specific and some of them are age specific as well. So for example, primary school maths, measurement and geometry topics, things like that. They all have a similar structured format and they have discussion boards where teachers in one school can actually share views with those at another. There's also an e-library with some other resources, curriculum, teacher guidance, videos, etc. So in some ways, it's quite similar to other online TPD courses, but in this context of Tanzania, it's pretty new, pretty novel. It's tailored to align with the Tanzania national curriculum, and it's in Swahili. It's still under development. It's literally only just been rolled out in the last few months and still hasn't really been accessed by all teachers yet, but it's getting going. But usually, of course, when TPD courses are completely online, then they're set up to be, self-learning individual things. But either way, teachers are engaging with the material and their instructor through their digital device. In this case, the community of learning modules on the LMS are meant for school-based, face-to-face communities of learning, which are peer facilitated by a teacher. So teachers are getting the materials and resources online, in a sense, but often through the peer facilitator, and they're doing the activities in person with other teachers in their community of learning group at their school. So that's how it becomes a blended form of TPD. So just to kind of finish off really by saying that the LMS and MOOC, the program, is continuing to evolve. The LMS is still doing rounds of user testing to kind of ensure that the platform is usable. Our design-based research team is entering our second phase in January for a new funded project, which will include teachers and schools across a wider sample of regions. And our particular focus will be on how the program is or isn't being adapted to teachers with diverse needs, and looking at the equitable participation of teachers with diverse needs in accessing it as the program is scaling up nationally. So we're focusing particularly on female teachers, teachers with disabilities, teachers in rural areas, teachers of different levels of experience, and so on. And then finally, we're going to conduct a statistical analysis, a difference in differences study, to look at potential changes in student learning over time that might be linked to the program. So that's it. I think I'm just on 5 minutes, so I will finish there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And now I invite all of our panelists to come off mute, and we will start the question and answer session, or a portion of tonight's webinar. And again, audience members, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A feature. So to our panelists, can you offer insights regarding whether and how online and blended teacher professional development can be a meaningful alternative to the more traditional in-person methods? So, for instance, Meaghan, you mentioned some of the opportunities and challenges with these TPD courses. So can you elaborate on the advantages and disadvantages of this approach? As we learned this evening, the evidence indicates a clear problem with retention in massive open online courses. So Meaghan, if you could elaborate on that more, and then the rest of our panelists, please join.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks, Kevin. So I think that there's a very long list of both affordances of online learning and challenges, right? And so we would be remiss not to discuss both. But you know, there's a lot of potential benefits out there that I think won't come as a surprise to anyone. You know, there's this ability to collaborate between, you know, potentially an unlimited number of practitioners internationally. You can build connections with and learn from a range of other educators, you know, in for our context, our courses. There's also that level of flexibility, which I think is really great. And especially if you're working, you know, full-time, even part-time, even not, having the flexibility to be able to do your work from home on your own time and sort of you know, mitigate and navigate those competing priorities, I think is really, really helpful. And I think that attracts a lot of people to that particular model. MOOCs also typically are no fees or low cost fees. But, you know, there's also a significant number of challenges alongside that, right? Like retention rates are often cited as very, very poor, which they are in a lot of typical MOOC platforms. Also, it can be difficult to have meaningful exchanges with other participants with the more sort of traditional, typical functionality that MOOCs provide. So, you know, a discussion forum can only bring you so far. So, you know, and we'll talk about design principles around that and how to create more meaningful exchanges, but I think that's a big challenge. Even we could see Kristeen being located in Tanzania today. She wasn't able to log in, right, because of connectivity issues. So there's that infrastructure that's problematic and can be a barrier to many people. And so even if, you know, you're signed on, a lot of the events we had were live. So there were time zone conflicts, but also connectivity issues, right? And also, I think digital literacy too, having familiarity with these platforms, how to engage in them fully, you know, I think that was really difficult. And difficulty, I'd say also, you know, being developed and having that sort of institution focus, like I was mentioning, there's a lot of difficulty with translating and adapting resources to local contexts and settings. And so I think, like, you know, those are sort of the big contenders. we, in our fundamentals MOOC, for example, we found a lot of issues with, time and conflicts in schedules. Motivation was an interesting area too. So we found actually in one of the previous trials that those who said they were taking the MOOC to learn from others were more likely to complete it. Those who said that they were taking the MOOC to receive accreditation from CEDiR, from not University of Cambridge, but a faculty research group associated with it, didn't complete the course. So it was really interesting, that too. So I think motivation is this area that's a bit fuzzy and gray at the moment. And I mean, I've already talked about mechanical MOOCs being an alternative to that better known, more traditional format. And I think that they address a lot of those issues found with like the bigger massive open online courses. It's a term that's sort of a catch-all. And like Farah mentioned, I'm sometimes hesitant to use it. It just means online course with the capacity for being unlimited for the number of participants. And also the open part of it. So massive open. The open part of it was crucial for the GitHub site, that it was open access. It was freely available. The content was freely available. And that really gave me hope, this alternative approach for sort of reclaiming the opportunity that MOOCs could afford, and that it could be an appropriate model for change. The other thing to note there in terms of retention rate and designing courses like this was that the first course was designed for local facilitators. So again, it was this intention that yes, it's online, it's open to an international body of participants, but it was meant to be locally adapted. And that as a conceptual framework, I think really helped. The creation, the design and development of the other two courses were meant to also be used by those facilitators. So I think that really helped with issues around relevance, around sustained impact, and also around retention. And so, yeah, so a lot of these things I think can build up to address a lot of those commonly found challenges, but it's not like we didn't find the same, very similar ones in our own courses. Farah, did you want to add anything else about the fundamentals course, or any specific, affordances or disadvantages of having it as that online structure?
Yeah, I think you've covered pretty much everything, Meaghan. So, there are a lot of issues to think about, lots of implications. I think, one thing that I think is quite interesting is that people did make, when it works well, people do make some quite deep connections between each other. And that is something that wouldn't have happened without it being an online platform. So across geography, across time zones and so on, people are making these connections. And there's a practical challenge to that, which we all need to think about a bit more, which is when people sign up, their email addresses, they can only contact each other through this particular platform. So they're having this dialogue in the discussion forum, or they're coming on to a meeting like this and they're getting to know each other. But then if they want to continue that conversation on a one-to-one level, they have to, the way for them to physically exchange contact details is a bit more challenging, because there are ethical issues around that and data protection. So I think that it's something worth thinking about. How could we put something in place where people are able to build these connections? And the reason I say that is because actually because we have these series of courses, we've had a number of people who've done the Fundamentals of Educational Dialogue, the Facilitators course, and then come onto the IELC platform and done the courses there, completed those courses. So you're beginning to get a network of people who are talking to each other, who remember each other from a previous course, and they're having professional dialogues that would not have happened through traditional in-person training. And I think that's the most powerful thing, with all the challenges, with all the dropout rate and everything that you're dealing with. When it is working, when people are able to connect to each other and you start building this community, this network, and people remember each other and they've got their contact details, you're creating quite a powerful movement. One of the things that is that actually I think is a positive that's coming out this movement is that educational ideas have got to be adapted to be translated across practice. And that applies within classrooms, within schools, let alone within local neighborhoods in the same type of school, going across internationally. And I think that if we can move away from research shows XYZ, go in your classroom, do XYZ, the outcome will be XYZ, which happened over there. Two, here's some thoughts and ideas and theories that people have about education. Here's how some different examples and case studies of how they've applied that and what's happened on the ground. Go away and do a reflective inquiry of what that might mean for yours setting and your classroom. Share that with some peers, either in similar classrooms or different classrooms, and see what that learning has to do so that you can, it's giving an agency and ownership to educators, which you could replicate in in-person training, but we're almost forced to do that because of the nature of the online platform. And I think that actually is a really powerful thing. It's a really positive thing. So that's what I would add to what Meaghan has already said.
Sarah, do you have anything you would like to add?
I think I could pile in with a number of other advantages and disadvantages, but I think we spent quite a lot of time on that question, so maybe I'll just I'll leave it. I would just say that in terms of, I'll just add, I mean, it's a very low resourced environment, so some of the challenges are not going to apply in other contexts, but they are ones that we are grappling with. Apart from connectivity, which Meaghan already mentioned, the cost of internet itself is prohibitive. Like, schools don't have any budget for internet. So we're relying on mobile phone providers to make the content 0 rated, for example. Only one has so far agreed to do that. So even if you had the connectivity, the actual cost of accessing the materials, is prohibitive. So that we have some sort of more basic practical issues there that we might not have in other contexts. So just to kind of put that there. But I think let's move on.
Okay. So we've talked about the why behind online and blended teacher professional development, but I'd like all of you to talk us through some specific course design principles to ensure that participants are able to meaningfully engage in the structure and content of an online or blended course, as well as ways in which the impact from the course can be sustained. And Farah, I invite you to start off answering that question. And I also refer you to one of the questions from our audience who was particularly interested in how to ensure that when working in a non-Western context, to make sure that dialogic practices developed in the West are not imposed on participants from other contexts.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point. And I guess it kind of, I'll start by building on what I said earlier, which is perhaps not in the design principles, unless I missed something, that I think Sarah and Meaghan sort of designed and that we are using. But I guess it's about that agency for the practitioner, the teacher, the educator in their setting to understand that they're coming to this course to think about what it means for them. And in that sense, even if there's an idea coming from Western educational research discourse, they can engage on it, with it, taking some ownership over that. What we've tried to do, encourage in our courses, is look at ideas from, broadly speaking, Islamic, which goes across like lots of different cultures, but the way that Islamic scholars and thought about educational theory and so on, and bring those ideas to the fore. And then some of those within the diverse Muslim cultures are not ideas that people are familiar with. So the way that we are approaching it is that the onus is on the person who's coming to the course to take some ownership in how they are engaging with the ideas presented to them, which itself is a dialogic practice, and which itself many practitioners are not used to. And so it takes a while for them to sort of see what the value of that is. And it takes a while for them to see that actually that's there in our own tradition and how to access it. And we have to produce materials and resources for them to be able to identify that, which it's not something that you can do in one day. It's not even something that you can do over 1 6-week course. But the key thing is that practitioner agency in accessing the materials on their own terms. Some people find that too onerous. They find that, like, I've come to do this course, tell me what to do, rather than I have to take that ownership. But as Meaghan said, it is to do with your motivation in an Islamic context. There's a very, very clear term that we talk about in a lot of depth called niyyah, which has a lot of implications and people are familiar with it. And then when you connect it to that and you connect the ownership to that if your niyyah, your intention or your motivation isn't aligned, then things are not going to operate and it's not going to work the way you want it to work, then people find that quite powerful. So I think that in terms of design principles, one of the key principles I would say is the participant agency and seeing this as something that they are doing to adapt to their own context, their own needs, is something that's very important in designing a course like this. I'm going to leave it there so other people can comment on, see if it'd be interesting to see if people disagree with what I've just said. Yeah.
I was going to say the same. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah. Okay, well, what I was going to say was building actually on what Farah said. In our context, the structure of the online TPD is kind of aiming to build a kind of a reflective habit of mind, which is not something that Tanzanian teachers are used to doing. So the sessions are all broken down into kind of reflect, learn, apply. So the modules aren't just providing interactive activities for people to do with their peers, but they're also kind of modeling the cycle of, taking the learning from the TPD and extending it into the classroom, reflecting and discussing how it went, coming back and going around. But the challenge is how to balance the amount of content with the amount of time spent on activities and reflection. And initially, the government was very keen to cram a whole load of content into every session, to get as much over as possible. And I think this is a pitfall that many designers fall into, whereas we've been trying to pull it back and trying to, sort of go along that learning curve of putting practice and dialogue at the core rather than giving information as being sort of the basis of an online course. So building in space and time to kind of address specific challenges that people are meeting with the materials, rather than kind of using up all the time on the content side. So yeah, I would just add that. And just one more thing, that if people don't have the kind of the capacity and the resources to develop their own online, their own blended TPD, then one option is to kind of take existing online materials, because there's quite a lot out there, online courses, but then set up time for TPD, for workshops, for peer discussion, to make sense of that material. So you don't have to do everything, yourselves as course designers. You can build on what's there, not reinvent the wheel. But the offline discussions about the material is where you can really add richness.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just to say, if I had just one sort of tip, one design principle to really focus on, it would be that we were intentionally participatory from the outset, from the initial design phase. And that, the principles for digital development are something to look at too, if you're not familiar with them. But the first one is design with the user. And I think that responds to some of the questions I'm seeing pop up here as well, in order to, track the completion of the MOOCs, to judge the impact of them. Somebody asked about the strategies to ensure buy-in. So I think it's the involvement of participants' voices from the very outset, from the initial conception of the course, straight through, and it doesn't end at, once the course is designed, it should continue. And so I think that model really helps create a very relevant, you know, very, very meaningful, or it can help to create these things in a course. And so I think that that's really helpful. And to note that the same goes for the other side. If you're the one taking a course, do provide feedback. It makes a big difference. Like we've really used it. We've tapped into that. And so it, you know, it for course participants as well, that's something to think through. And there are other things to do too that are good practice, like just for encouraging exchange. Like we had research buddies that we partnered participants with, which we had great feedback about. That was really good. The discussion forum remains quite challenging to create spontaneous discussion, but it can be tapped to in a sort of different way as well. So yeah, there's sort of good practices that won't surprise anyone, but I do recommend looking at the Principles for Digital Development, which essentially summarize most of them.
Thank you, Meaghan. So our next question, it's one for each of our panelists, and I will break it down into pieces. But Meaghan and Farah, the courses that you design are for an international group of practitioners, and Sara, the LMS has been designed for Tanzanian teachers. So I'd like to know who's taking the course, which teachers are taking the course, who is really benefiting, how does access and equity fit into course design and facilitation? We have a related question from the audience around how you ensure participant and teacher buy-in in the program. So Sara, perhaps you can start with your insights on this issue.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we chose to focus on teachers in remote rural schools because they, you know, typically have the least access to TPD generally, and also because of connectivity. So they especially don't have access to online TPD typically. But we have found, yeah, the connectivity has been even more of a challenge than we anticipated. With our 8 schools in our design-based research, only 3 could have had any kind of internet coverage to be able to access the materials. So we've ended up having to provide PDF versions offline, send them around by WhatsApp or on a Raspberry Pi server. But the trouble is that doesn't have the videos, and teachers really are very motivated by the video material. They want to hear the audio and the video rather than be reading text. So it's a pretty impoverished option, and it's something we're exploring for the next phase, how we can get around that. But it does mean that there are equity issues, because it's, you know, it's kind of where you're located that ends up being whether you have a rich experience of the TPD, and that's problematic. The other thing, as I mentioned earlier, is that in our next phase, we'll be looking at adaptation to teachers with diverse needs, and that will include teachers with disabilities. So we'll be looking at whether the materials, you know, have closed captions on the videos. I mean, they generally do, but, you know, large print versions and all the kinds of accessibility issues that we need to deal with. So yeah, so I think those issues are being explored, but in answer to your question, not all the teachers are currently accessing the materials for a multitude of reasons, but partly to do with those sort of equity-related issues.
Yeah, so around questions of accessibility, there are so many different things that need to be thought about. So one of the things that we've tried to do, but I realize we're not necessarily the best at, is understand how the platform itself can be more accessible for people who may have various accessibility needs. So things like providing a transcript for people who may not be able to access the video or access an audio, things like the size of fonts and the colors that are used and the background color and that kind of thing. Those are actually quite significant and important. Another kind of accessibility issue that we do overlook a lot is language, and we are working towards that and making strides on that. So some of the resources, the Toolkit for Systematic Educational Dialogue Analysis, CEDiR, that that is a sort of accompanies many of these courses has been translated into multiple languages, which has really helped. So in our context, we had that translated in Arabic. We're thinking about getting these courses translated into languages that other people can access, which is significant, because it may be the case that people can kind of follow on with what you're saying in English, but when they read it in their own language, they've understood it in a much deeper kind of way. The other thing is, it sounds, I don't know whether it's an accessibility thing, but actually it's just how to make it work in that sense. Facilitation is really important. What we mean by that is, I think somebody's asking a question about having local champions. Yeah, exactly, something like that. So somebody locally that people can talk to offline, who has done the course or is supporting a group of people to do the course together. All of that actually makes a big difference in terms of accessibility for teachers to be able to do something useful with the course. Another thing that we've done, actually, I think I mentioned the transcripts thing, but there's a range of ways. Yeah, so somebody's asking about what do you do with overly challenging material. Now, the thing is that we have in the course that we have different levels of material available. So the core reading is normally very accessible and very simple. And then we'll have some additional resources for people who want that further challenge. What we found, though, is that the people who find those additional resources more challenging, they are still wanting to be able to access them. So you don't know how to, it's a differentiation issue, is that you don't want to not provide the challenging resources for those people who are looking for those. But at the same time, it's not an easy answer in terms of the other option would be to devise a range of different courses at different levels. But there's other issues around that, because this kind of stuff is being done at the moment around research, and to keep it sustainable, it actually is quite costly. But what we're trying to do is either keep it open access or keep it very low cost. So there's lots of things to balance in terms of accessibility.
Yeah, I was just looking at Lisa's first question there too, around, asking about how to make adaptations, that process. Just going back to my previous point too, around being participatory from the outset, that really helped us. One of the questions we asked on the pre-course questionnaire was, do you have any preferences or accessibility, issues for us to address, or any requests for us to make happen? And that was helpful. We had a couple people request, for example, written transcripts of things, and so that helped form the course. And but I think it, again, was important to revisit throughout the facilitation of the course too, because things sort of changed. The second thing to add there is, again, about the local facilitators. One group of teachers we had join us from Sierra Leone had a lot of connectivity issues. And so in terms of, Lisa, your question there around having limited to no access to technology, we found that the facilitator was actually really helpful in that sense. So they were able to take it offline, and we had downloadable versions of every week's content for that specific course. So that was for the facilitators course. So again, adapting it to the needs of that cohort was really important. And then revisiting those things and following it up with the post-course survey. Was there any part of this course that was difficult to access or sort of manage? What was it? And ensuring that those post-course surveys were sent out to people who weren't just the ones who completed the course. I really sought feedback from those who dropped out. And so that was really important in terms of like a sort of monitoring and evaluation perspective, is to capture those voices. One of the things that we sort of skimmed over too is that it's difficult to measure that impact because of that, because like we said, the mechanical MOOC model, it allows anybody to come in. So you're not able, like you would on Coursera, for example, and I have analyzed some of their data, and it is amazing how much data they have, and you can track a user, their demographics, exactly what they've done in the course. We're not able to do that with the mechanical MOOC model. And so it's about, connecting with the participants in a very meaningful way, where you're inviting feedback in a way that works for them too, and that you're able to process it, you're able to do something with it immediately, so that they can see that their voices have been used to inform the design of the course.
Thank you all for those thoughts. I have a follow-up question, because you have all mentioned, and particularly Farah and Meaghan, you mentioned the role of group work outside of the MOOC. And Farah, you described it as a way of increasing accessibility, because much of the learning can then happen in small groups that was then accessed through the MOOC. So my question is, what is the role of that kind of small group interaction with your MOOCs? How do you capture the learning that's happening in those small groups, and is it even important to capture that learning?
Okay, so I mean, if you're looking at it from a researcher's hat on, you want to try and capture that learning because you're trying to understand what's happening there. But aside from that, I don't think it's necessarily important to capture that learning. I think what's important is that it is through that dialogue, or when course participants are talking to each other about the ideas that they've just heard about, read about, talked about a bit on the discussion forum, but when they then talk live, it does open up a whole different layers of understanding the same thing. So somebody will then say, oh, I didn't understand that that's what you meant when you said that. Now I get it. A lot of the things we ask participants to do is to give examples from what they're doing with it in their own classroom context. And people often ask questions about, okay, so this is my situation, what do I do? And that allows peers to also respond, but also if there is a course facilitator, or if we're running an online session on the course, for us to respond and to give that kind of support. One thing that I found very, very useful is when we're asking teachers to do their own inquiry, they are at a loss as to what we mean. And unless they've completed some other courses and so on, it's like if you are talking about the content isn't necessarily about how to do an inquiry, but you want them to do some sort of reflective inquiry, what really helps is to say to them, well, what do you want to achieve? And just sort of have a one-to-one or a small group conversation within the online kind of gathering, or outside the online gathering, where what is it you want to achieve? Okay, if you want to achieve this, then you might try thinking about it in this kind of way. And that little impetus then gives them a base to start working from, to think about what their inquiry might how that might sort of pan out. Yeah, I hope that's useful. So.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, absolutely, I agree with everything you said there in terms of reflections about how that worked out in practice. But it was interesting because a lot of the feedback was sort of contradictory in some ways. So the discussion forum, for example, some participants felt that it allowed them the space to think through and reflect on their comment before posting it. However, others felt that it was so public facing that they were scared about posting something, because instead of just saying something out loud on the spot, that in terms of that sort of more spontaneous discussion, they were a bit concerned that it was going up, everybody could see it. And so it was about navigating those tensions. And so what you just said around having space for more like learning communities to discuss things, I think that it is a balancing act. And we found that there were a lot of great conversations that could happen on the side. And for example, we had the research buddies and the partnerships, and they had their own conversations that we didn't look at as researchers. We did request their feedback. And so again, there's that balancing act of it. So giving the space to have those discussions, to localize and contextualize and adapt the resources, the readings, the materials of the course to a local context. But then from a researcher's perspective, if you do want something from them to look at and to sort of look at that impact, you can request a summary for them to post on the discussion forum, for example. So you're sort of balancing it out. But I would highly recommend ensuring that those spaces exist. for them to really have a deep dive into their own setting. We did that in a couple ways. The other way was through reflective exercises, where we asked them to reflect on, localizing the content to their specific setting. And they produced, as part of the end course, a reflective account that we were able to read. So then again, from a researcher's perspective, we were able to look at that for those who did send them in, submit them. So yeah, I think that answer goes, like, it's applicable to everything in the online course. It's a constant balancing act of just enough content, but not too much, but framed in a way that it's not overwhelming. And, and so like how many weeks to include, how much content per week, how long a video should be, apparently no more than 6 minutes, these kinds of things. So, there's a constant balancing of the design and of the content. And what inevitably happens is you think, okay, we're going to have to build another course. And so, yeah, I'm not sure if that responds fully to your question, Kevin, but.
Yes, thank you. Sarah, if you don't have anything to add, I will move to our last question for today. But given that I'm here representing the Digital Education Futures Initiative, I'd like to ask you about where MOOCs are going next. What is the future of MOOCs, particularly in light of all of the change that's happening because of rapid advances in technology like AI, and much of that change is disruptive. So will MOOCs move to other modalities? Will they still be here in 10 years? Will AI take over? I'd love to hear your thoughts as we conclude.
I can sort of start, and then Sarah, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts too. But yeah, I think online learning isn't going anywhere for professional development. I think that we're still trying to tap into certain functionality that can lean us towards better outcomes. So in terms of the future, the use of AI, I think that AI can really help. I see a role for it in the monitoring and evaluation aspect, tracking user journeys through the site. Like, I had to look at click logs, and it took me, I'm not joking, weeks. So that can all be eased through the use of technology, I think. But the important thing going forward is that we continue to be pedagogy first, technology second. We know that technology is not a silver bullet to solve all of the world's educational challenges. And so that's the important thing to keep in mind going forward, that it's always pedagogy of focus first, the technology comes afterwards. And looking at those principles of digital development as core to how we create future courses. But going back to that functionality piece, like, we trialed the use of a piece of software that was really interesting, where it allowed you to look at a video and anybody could sign in. It was cloud-based, and you could stop the video and write a comment, and somebody else could respond to that comment. And I thought, that's interesting. Now, that's technology that is creating new forms of dialogue. And so things like that, I think that there's definitely a role to strengthen the exchange that happens in courses, that online courses can hopefully become something adjacent to in-person courses. I don't think that they can replace it. I see blended courses as the sort of the more common, probably, for professional development. But yeah, so I don't think it's going anywhere, certainly, but hopefully we continue to learn from the challenges and sort of address those in better, more effective ways in the future, in the not so far future.
Yeah, so the only thing I'd add to what Meaghan's saying is that with AI, it's, so I think somebody else said this, so it's not my phrase, but it's neither artificial nor is it intelligent, right? In the sense that it only gives out what is put into it. And the whole question of AI perpetuating inequalities and perpetuating privileges and privileging knowledge bases or ideas that are already privileged, and then sort of like enhancing those inequalities as opposed to tackling that, is an issue, I think, that needs to be thought about when it comes to professional development. How you tackle that is a case of us rethinking it could work if the will is there to put the right information in there, and then so that it is able then to respond to things in an appropriate way. But some of the responses that come out from AI are rather sort of like alarming, to say the least. There's an example right now where that you put in for one set of people, do they have the right to be free? And it's like, of course they have the right to be free. And then you put in for another set of people, and the answer is, well, that's complicated. And that level of problem is something that, if we are thinking about doing professional development, and what we're all trying to do is to advance education so that we are solving problems rather than perpetuating them, then I think human values and the morality that comes with real life people, we need to work out how we're going to harness that to use technology. As Meaghan said, technology is what you do with it, but then where technology is, you have less control over it, then there are problems that could arise. I don't know, I don't want to be a harbinger of doom, but I just thought it might be worth mentioning.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to agree with both of you, really. I mean, there are exciting new possibilities, definitely, with new technologies, with AI in particular. And I think we just need to be working out how we can harness those, how we can exploit them to their best potential without sacrificing any of our values, any of our pedagogy, and ensuring that, essentially opportunities for dialogue remain there between the participants in a MOOC or the practitioners, whoever they are, in whatever format that is, whether that is in an online discussion forum, live teaching, face-to-face session that goes around a blended, an online environment, before, after it, etc. There are multiple models and multiple combinations of all of those different modes of learning. There isn't one right one, for sure. And I think we just need to keep experimenting. But the key thing is that those the answer is never going to be a single one. It's going to be adapted to the context. And I think it's always got to be what is right for those participants in that context, under those conditions, at that particular point in time. And so, yeah, our work is all focused on, how do you scale something, something you want to teach, something you want to learn, whilst allowing the freedom to locally contextualize it and giving people the agency to do that, and just navigating that tension. So I just noticed the time, Kevin, so I've come to an abrupt halt.
That's fine, and I noticed I was on mute, so you didn't hear me wrapping up. But yeah, that is unfortunately all we have time for today. So on behalf of CEDiR and DEFI, thank you all for joining us and for this insightful webinar. As we close, I'd like to extend my gratitude to Meaghan, Farah, and Sara for sharing their work and thoughts with us today, and especially to Sara for stepping in at the last moment. I think all of us leave with an enhanced understanding of the role of dialogue in teaching and learning, and particularly through online platforms and MOOCs. To our participants, remember that today's discussion is just the beginning. We encourage you to continue the conversation, apply the knowledge gained, and explore further the themes we've discussed. Please keep an eye on the DEFI and CEDiR websites, where we will share the recording of today's session. If you would like to learn more or continue the dialogue, we encourage you to reach out to us through our website or connect on social media. So thank you once again for your participation. We look forward to seeing you again in the future. Happy ending to 2023, and all the best for the start of your 2024. So thank you and goodbye.